Hello there, welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews. My name is Alyssa, and this is my video for the 10 worst romances and relationships in Star Trek. This is part of a series of videos in which each month I will pick a different topic, and I will do 2 separate videos on that topic. First, I will do the worst of that topic, and then the following week I will release the best of that topic. And this month, August 2022, the topic is romances and relationships, and this video will cover the worst of those. By my opinion, no other metric, just my point of view. That's all this is based off of. And let me start real quickly by explaining what I mean by romances and relationships, because I'm actually talking about 2 different things. What I mean by a romance in Star Trek is a one-off. It's when 2 characters get together in the course of a 45-minute long episode. Usually they just meet for the first time in that episode. Sometimes it's implied that they've met off screen already. Usually one of them is a guest character and one is our main cast member. And those are actually really hard to pull off, which is why there's a lot of those on this list. Then what I mean by relationships is an ongoing relationship, usually between 2 cast members. And oftentimes on this list of the worst relationships in Star Trek, you will find that the characters really shouldn't have been together. They had no chemistry, and the writers, for whatever reason, decided to force feed a relationship between these 2 characters. So you will see that a lot on this list. You'll see some reoccurring themes on this list. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and start counting down my 10 worst romances and relationships in Star Trek, starting with my number 10. Number 10! And number 10 on my list of the worst romances in Star Trek is Ezri Dex and Julian Bashir. And I have a feeling I'm going to get a lot of disagreement on this. I get the feeling that a lot of people really loved this relationship at the very end of Season 7 of Deep Space Nine. And why not? Let's root for Dr. Bashir. I mean, he has had a crush on Jadzia Dax since the beginning of the series. And that was never going to happen. That was really clear. But he gets a second chance with Ezri. So, hey, why not? Good for him. Good for Dr. Bashir. He finally gets the Dax that he had been chasing since Season 1. Now, here's the problem. I think the writers were also approaching it that way. Like, hey, let's give Dr. Bashir a Dax. He's wanted her since the beginning of the series. Wouldn't that be nice for him? Let's just do it. Chemistry be damned. There is no chemistry between these 2. I'm sorry. And Ezri has really no reason to like him at all, or at least not in that way. She just seems to all of a sudden, out of nowhere, fall in love with him. It definitely was something that was just written on the page, so voila, you're in love. It felt like Dr. Bashir had given her a love potion or something, or maybe that thing that Nurse Chapel used on Spock in that crappy animated series episode with Harry Mudd in it. We don't want to talk about that. But anyways, I just don't see it. It just felt like one of those force-fed relationships by the writers. Now, I will say that this is the least offensive of those, and as I go through this list, those force-fed relationships will get worse and worse. Number 9. At number 9, Picard and Vash. A bad romance that spans 2 episodes in Star Trek The Next Generation, the 3rd season episode Captain's Holiday, and the 4th season episode Cupid. So, when this bad romance first appeared in Captain's Holiday, it was very clearly the writer's attempt to do Star Trek's version of Romancing the Stone, which was a popular 1980s movie starring Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner, in which Douglas and Turner play these kind of Indiana Jones type archaeologist type people, but they are arguing and fighting with each other all throughout the movie and end up at the end having a romance together. But Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner had had a lot of chemistry together. Picard and Bash have no chemistry, and that's a phrase you will hear me repeat throughout this video. So the show is trying to tell me that Picard and Bash like each other and have this affinity for each other, even though they argue all the time. I just see two people who don't like each other. That's what I see on the screen. And to make things worse, they decided to bring this character back for a reprise in the 4th season episode Cupid, a really stupid plot in which Q forces Picard and Bash to live through Robin Hood and his merry men, and Picard is Robin Hood, and Bash is Maid Marian, and he's supposed to rescue her. It's so dumb, so dumb. Thankfully, after that episode, they finally put the kibosh on Picard and Bash as a couple, although we would see this character one more time with Q in an early 1st season Deep Space Nine episode, but we don't need to talk about that here.
Number 8.
At number 8, Scotty and Lieutenant Mira Romaine from the 3rd season original series episode The Lights of Zatar. This romance makes this list because I think Scotty deserves some representation here. Scotty is a terrible boyfriend. He has 2 romances that I recall in the original series. The first one having been in the 2nd season episode Who Mourns for Adonis, which is the one with Apollo in it. In both episodes, Scotty is clingy, he's possessive, he's overbearing, and he's condescending. He's just awful. And this episode in particular, he really enjoys talking down to Mira as if she is some sort of child. There's a scene where she's arguing with Dr. McCoy and she doesn't want to comply with his medical orders, and Scotty says to her, "Oh, now, Mira, be a good little girl and listen to the good doctor." And I'm like, dude, she's a freaking grown-ass woman, you dick. And he does not listen to a word she says. She's trying to explain to him that weird shit is happening to her, and it's not like weird shit doesn't happen all the time on the Enterprise, but he's like, no, you're just a stupid little girl, don't know what you're talking about, you're just suffering through space sickness, that's all it is. He is terrible. But that in and of itself is not why this romance makes this list. This romance makes this list because there is a great discrepancy between what we see on screen, as I just described it, and what the show wants us to believe that this is. And what the show wants us to believe that this is some deeply rooted, deep love that these two share, and they're so in love with each other, and it's so beautiful. And they have the scene at the beginning of the episode where they're on the bridge looking at each other with lovey-dovey eyes, and Sulu and Chekhov are admiring how much they're in love, and Kirk even puts it in his freaking captain's log, not his personal log, but the ship's captain's log, where he's like, Scotty is deeply in love. He actually talks about Scotty and his throbbing engines. I don't need to hear anything about throbbing anything with Scotty. But anyways, it's awful because they want us to believe it's some deep love, and it is the exact opposite of that. It's Scotty being an overbearing, condescending asshole. At number 7, Tom Paris and B'Elanna Torres, an ongoing relationship which spans several seasons of Star Trek Voyager. This is another prime example of a relationship that was kind of just force-fed to us by the writers. They just decided, hey, let's take this character over here and put them in a relationship with this character over here, and who cares if there's any chemistry between the actors or the characters. It just doesn't develop naturally at all. It feels very, very forced, and although it does last for several seasons, that doesn't make it a good relationship. I really get the impression oftentimes that they don't even really like each other that much. And I have also noticed in my Voyager rewatch recently that we'll go sometimes 2, 3, maybe even 4 episodes in a row where the two characters barely interact, don't have any scenes together. probably because they're very difficult to write for, because there really is nothing there. And when they are written for, it's usually the same thing over and over. They fight, they scream, they argue, and then they make up at the end of the episode. But the making up honestly doesn't feel real to me. It doesn't feel like they really like each other. Relationships are actually a lot more nuanced and complicated than just fighting and making up all the time. I would need to see like a deeply rooted friendship, a deeply rooted appreciation for one another that I just don't see, but I will see it in some of the relationships that I talk about next week in the best romances and relationships in Star Trek, but definitely not here.
Number 6.
At number 6, speaking of force-fed relationships, Lieutenant Worf and Deanna Troi from Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 7. Now, this could be higher up on my list and be an even worse romance, if not for the fact that I really liked the first episode in which this romance appears, and that is the only episode in which the romance actually works for me, and that is Parallels, a Season 7 episode where Worf is bouncing around to different parallel universes. It was number 10 on my top 20 favorite episodes of The Next Generation, so it is an episode that I love. And the relationship works in that episode particularly because it's our Worf jumping to different universes and meeting alternate versions of Counselor Troi, who has fallen in love with Worf and who's been married to him for a little while. And it makes sense there that there's no chemistry because our Worf didn't live those experiences that these alternate Troys did. So when he returns to his own universe, I think it's okay for him to go, that's an interesting concept. Me and Troi, But then he should go, oh yeah, that's right, we don't actually have any chemistry together in this universe. And that should have been the end of it. Instead, a relationship was force-fed for the remainder of Season 7, and no episode is worse for this relationship than the latter season episode, The Eye of the Beholder. I don't even want to get into it. It's very, very terrible episode. And unfortunately, this relationship marks the one stain on an otherwise great finale, All Good Things, where they do have to bring it up, and it's silly because this relationship never really worked. When Worf would go to Deep Space Nine, he just pretends like this never happened, which is probably for the best.
Number 5.
At number 5 on my list, Picard and Laris from Star Trek Picard Season 2. It's really disappointing that I have to have an entry on this list from the year 2022, this year, because I would have thought that the writers in Modern Trek would be over the force feeding of relationships. And in fact, you will find on my best romance list lots of representation from Modern Trek, because I do think they do romances better in general, which is what makes this one even more disappointing. So I guess they really had to have Picard have a love interest in Season 2, and they were like, well, obviously it can't be Seven, it can't be Raffi, Girardi's not going to work at all. Hey, let's just make him in a romance with Laris, even though Laris has a husband. Oh, don't worry about him. Let's just kill him off screen, just have one line about how he died off screen, and nobody gives a fuck about it for the rest of the season. And now they can be together, and I know I keep saying this over and over, but there is no chemistry. This is one of the more forced relationships I have ever seen. And then it's only in the first episode, and then Picard goes back in time and leaves Laris behind, but meets Talon, who is played by the same actress, who is Laris's identical twin, because that's how ancestry works in Star Trek, particularly in Star Trek Picard Season 2. If you're an ancestor of someone, then you look exactly like them. And there's definitely no romance between Talon and Picard, But spending time with Talon then reminds Picard about how much he loves Laris, and so goes back to the present and then has a romance with Laris, and it is absolutely awful, just like the entirety of that season. But I'm not here to talk about that. I've ranted about that enough on this channel. Here I am just talking about how forced and unnatural and awful the relationship between Picard and Laris is.
Number 4. Woo!
At number 4, Captain Kirk and Miramini, I think it's pronounced, from the 3rd season original series episode, The Paradise Syndrome. So, in this episode, the Enterprise visits a planet where they find a tribe of American Indians, or people who are very similar to American Indians, and they are portrayed as being very primitive and dumb, especially compared to us smart and sophisticated white people, or at least that's how it's portrayed in this episode. Kirk gets amnesia, and he's found by this woman who sees him as a god and worships him. And Kirk, being egotistical as he is, even when his memory is lost, eats this right up. He really enjoys being worshipped by somebody as a god. And this is what they're trying to pass off as a romance. And they try to get us to care about this by having Kirk get her pregnant. We're like, oh, they're having a baby together. Oh, so emotional and wonderful. Blah, 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 blah. But of course, she can't possibly have this child because that would ruin Captain Kirk going around and conquering other ladies in future episodes once he gets his memory back. So no, we can't have that. We must kill off this female character so that Kirk can just forget all about her and this baby he would have had and just move on and have sex with the next lady in the next episode. It's disgusting. I'm sorry, there's nothing touching, nothing sad, nothing emotional remotely about this episode. It's absolutely disgusting. Number 3, Dr. McCoy and Natira from yet another 3rd season original series episode, For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky. I actually think the 3rd season of the original series has a lot of really bad romances in it, but I decided to narrow it down to just 3 of them for this list to give a chance for all the other bad romances in the Star Trek universe. This time it's Dr. McCoy's turn. He meets this woman and she basically just says to him, Dr. McCoy, I love you. We must be mates now. And Dr. McCoy's like, sure, why not? To be fair to him, he has been diagnosed with a fatal disease and believes he doesn't have much longer to live. Of course, that disease gets conveniently healed at the end of the episode, but he, is just like, fuck it. Well, I might as well just leave the Enterprise and go live the rest of my days with this beautiful woman, and I don't fault him for that. But again, there's that discrepancy between the reality of what's happening and what the show wants us to believe. The reality is McCoy is just saying, fuck it, there's a beautiful woman, why not? What the show wants us to believe is there's some deeply rooted love, like they're star-crossed lovers who have been soulmates forever or something like that. And it isn't even remotely close to that. Again, say it with me, everybody. There is no chemistry. And this is one of the worst examples of no chemistry. I get the impression watching this that the 2 actors in real life probably hate each other. They barely say any words to each other at all in this episode. I cannot believe that they are trying to convince us that this is some kind of deep romance.
Number two.
At number 2, Jadzia Dax and Goodwin. Actually, it's Dural or something like that, but I think of him as Goodwin from Lost. This is from the 3rd season, Deep Space Nine episode, Meridian. This is, of course, before Worf would join the cast. And this episode is about the Defiant going to visit this planet of people where the people live part of their lives on this planet and part of the time they go off to this other dimension and become energy or something. I forget exactly how it works. But they are in the other dimension for 60 years at a time and then they come back to the planet for a little while. And Jadzia supposedly has fallen madly in love with this guy, even though she only met him 5 minutes ago, and is ready to give up her life to go live with him in this other dimension for 60 years. And by the time she comes back, of course, everybody she knows will be old or dead. But, it's worth it because they're madly, deeply in love. Or that's what the show wants us to think. So this is, to me, the ultimate example of the show trying to tell us one thing, but what we see on the screen is something entirely different. What I see on the screen with these two characters are two people who lust after each other. The way that they look at each other, they want to bang. They want to do the nasty. They want to get down with the funky monkey. You know what I'm saying? And there's nothing wrong with that. Jadzia deserves to get some action as much as anyone else does. But there is a huge difference between two people who just want to bang all day and two people who are so deeply, madly in love that one of them is willing to give up her life for the other one. And it's not there. And I'm sorry, but I kind of lose respect for Jadzia after this episode because she's so flighty, where she just met this dude 5 minutes ago, doesn't know the first thing about him, just wants to have sex with him, is ready to give up her entire life on Deep Space Nine and go to this other dimension for 60 years. It is just awful. And that is why it is number 2 on my list, and actually the worst one-off romance in Star Trek, because the next one I'm going to talk about is a multi-episode arc between two known characters. Number 1. And the number 1 worst romance in Star Trek, in my opinion, and I think in a lot of other people's opinions too, Chakotay and 7 of 9, a notoriously bad pairing of characters that never should have happened. The best thing I can say about it is at least it only appears in a couple different episodes and then Voyager mercifully goes off the air. So this is long after Voyager had jumped the shark, in my opinion, at least as far as how they wrote 7 of 9. 7 of 9 was originally introduced to the show for sex appeal, but at least they used to write good stories for her, but then toward the end there, they just went full on into that sex appeal angle and tried to make her into a living, walking soap opera, basically. And this particular romance begins in the episode Human Error, which was one of my least favorite Voyager episodes on that video that I did, my top 10 least favorite Voyager episodes, where 7 of 9 is trying to find her human side by living in a soap opera, and all of a sudden she has this crush on Chakotay out of nowhere, and this comes to fruition in the finale, Endgame, and I don't think either of the actors were into this at all. In fact, I think I've heard Robert Beltran quote that he was not into this, and you can tell when you watch it. So let me say it one more time. There is no chemistry. And I think a lot of people who have watched this will agree with that. It's just very difficult to actually watch these two characters try to force their lines together and pretend that they're in some sort of romance. It is the worst thing ever, and thank God when 7 of 9 comes back on Star Trek Picard, she does not mention Chakotay at all, and nor should she. Let's just pretend that the number 1 worst romance in Star Trek, never ever happened. Alright, thank you so much for joining me for my 10 worst Star Trek romances and relationships. Please join me next week where I become a lot more positive and talk about my 10 best romances and relationships in Star Trek. See you all real soon. Goodbye.